Okay, we're going to be doing, let everyone know that they're being recorded and transcribed. All right. Welcome to part 2 of the first class, and this is the first introduction into Photoshop that we're going to be going through and doing this evening. So this is to help you guys understand. The first project we're going to be doing is taking an old sketch and bringing it into digital. The idea here is that all of you guys have been using traditional media for most of your lives, right? You've been drawing on paper, you've been working with watercolors, maybe some acrylics are thrown in there, some oil pastels, oil paints, all that good stuff. This project is designed to take those skills, those traditional hand drawing skills, those hand skills that you've got, and you start off with a medium that you're used to. From there, we're going to move into something that you're maybe not quite as familiar with, which is digital illustration. So I'm going to show you a couple quick examples from past projects that I've done and help you get an idea of where we're headed with this. All righty. So this is an old sketch that I did back in the day, right? I liked it. I thought it was kind of Wile E. Coyote-ish, mixed with like a ghost or something. And it's just a little doodle. But I think that it highlights one of the cool parts that I'm asking you guys to do on this project, which is to take these old sketches, the stuff that you're familiar with, and when you bring it into digital, you've got the ability, unlike you do when you go and do an acrylic painting on a canvas or a sheet of paper or board, to really modify and edit these sketches, to go back and make adjustments, and to work in a non-destructive format, to where you can take that sketch and then have it become something like this. It's a big old painting, so it might take a second for it to load. Sorry if it lags a little bit while this is coming up. Come on, buddy. Oh boy. Come on now. All right. Yay. Oh, I guess it was a Photoshop file. Ah, there we go. All right, so here is what the final painting ended up becoming. And you can see from that original sketch that I've added color to this thing. I've gone through and added a lot more details. I've really thought through this initial sketch in a digital format and turned it into something that is a finished Photoshop piece. I've also edited the shape of the character quite a bit. I've added a background within there, and I think that it becomes a pretty successful, interesting illustration towards the end. Let me show you a few more examples so that we can get the idea. All right, so here is one that I did just last semester for the digital illustration course. All right, so it's going to start off in this format. Pretty good drawing, pretty interesting. There's some interesting things about it within a drawing stage. And as I start to go through, what I'm going to do first on this one is go in and get my line work in there. So I'm going to take my sketch on a new layer within Photoshop. I'm going to start separating things out, and I'm going to start doing my line work within it. As we get into the second project, we'll see that line work becomes a lot more important with digital paintings. So if you are working traditionally, you are going to appreciate this sketch at this scale, at a notebook scale. But as we start to move digital, people are going to zoom in on these things. And so our line work, our line weight becomes a lot more important when we're working digitally. You can see here that my line weight is varying a lot. I've got some sections that are thick, some parts that are thin. And this is, really what you see within a lot of Disney animation. You see it within anime, you see it within manga. And this is a more professional way to be able to do line art. We'll talk a lot about why that works. After that, we're going to go in and we're going to start adding some flat color. We're going to do a flat color pass to these pieces. You can see how adding all of this negative space up at the top of this image really helps the composition breathe a lot more than it was on my original page. And then as we continue to work through these paintings, we're going to be doing the same kind of thought process throughout the entire semester. The details start to build. Pretty cool, right? So from there, we start from our original sketch, bring it into Photoshop. See how I'm changing the canvas size, positioning some things. Looks good at this stage, and if it looks good, you know, at this stage, this looks interesting visually, like it's working, well, then this stage is going to work. And then guess what? When you go back and polish it off and get to your final illustration, that's probably going to work pretty well too. And that is why we want to build these paintings in their different stages and layers. I'm going to show you one more example here. So this last one, yeah, there we go. So this was my initial sketch for this painting. And again, from the initial sketch, just like we saw with the witch example that I showed you previously, I want to bring that up since this is a different video. Cool, we'll talk about both of them at the same time. So within the witch, over here on the left-hand side, you can see how they are using curves within the witch's body, on the witch's hat, through her back, through the front of her, kind of cusping around with the objects within the background to be able to create a really nice flow that gets our attention and focuses us on what it is we want as artists, the viewers, to look at. What is the most important part here? The same thing is happening with my general setup on this character. There are a lot of problems with this character, right? The torso is way too long. The leg isn't long enough. I'm working with really, really fast general shapes. The arm is too short here. There's just a lot of funky stuff going on, but I've got the basis for my idea. As I go through and start to refine that drawing, here we go. I'm fixing things along the way. So this is me going back and then digitally resketching the torso. You can see that I've applied my final line over the top, and this line work is much stronger than the one that you saw of the guy walking away. We've got those thick and thin lines that are going on again. There's a good flow to the overall action, and you can see the mechanics of my underlying drawing as I'm going back and fixing things and sort of establishing stuff, right? Things are really, really sketchy and loose, and I'm drawing. This is something sometimes beginning illustration students don't quite do as well as they should. The mechanics. I'm really drawing this thing with this initial sketch in volumes, right? So I'm establishing with this circle here in brown, what is the shape? I'm drawing shapes. I'm not just drawing the outline of a foot. I'm drawing the geometry of what this foot would look like if it was 3D modeled or if it was a real foot. And I'm doing that throughout the entire thing. For the ankles, they are circular. This has got some roundness to it as well to be able to help me understand the different masses as we move through the character. Rib cage, all that good stuff. Where's my center line? Where's my line of action going through the character? And you can see how that started off in brown. I adjusted it in orange, and then finally I landed on the black one at the very end. And oops, the same process is going to happen with each one of these steps and each one of these examples that I'm showing you guys. After I get my line work, then I am going in there and I am going in and adding the flat color to this piece. Once I've got my flat color, this flat color represents a middle tone, a middle value. From there, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a shadow pass. And you notice that I'm not just working on the hair. I'm not just working on the face or the eye. I'm developing this entire illustration in passes. Right? So I'm doing all of the flat color and then all of the shadow pass and then all of the highlights and then working my way into the details. This is the best way for you guys to work quick, mechanically, and effectively to be able to get a really strong illustration at the end here. So there it is. This is the shadow pass on this next piece. You can see that I'm going through from that middle tone, right? I don't know if I can zoom in here, but the middle tone, and I'm working with my brush. I think it's at like 45 to 80% there, and everything is pretty sharp. I haven't softened any of these edges. I'm working pretty sharp right now, and I'm just establishing big areas of first shadow and value throughout the entire piece. This is my guide. From here, I'm going to work deeper into those shadows, and now I know where my highlights are going to come from. I'm establishing a sense of lighting within this piece as well. All right, so here is the next pass. I've gone in and I've worked on those shadows a little bit deeper. You can see that things are getting darker within this area. They're getting darker between the rib cage and the torso. We're really starting to get some good gradients and muscle tone that's going on here. So those hard, rough areas that I worked in at the beginning, some of those are still staying sharp, but a lot of them are getting softer, and I'm starting to think a little bit more in gradients as I work out of those shadow passes and then use that ambient occlusion effect for where the light can't quite penetrate to be able to make some areas darker and quite a bit darker. All right, so here's the next one. So there we go. Now we're starting to get into the final for this piece. I've gone in on top of the rendering that I created. There's quite a few changes that have happened here. I've turned it from just being the browns and the tans, and instead taken my shadow layer and added some purple over the top of it, just so that it matches, so that it offsets with the yellow, purple, and yellow, complementary colors, and then gone through and then added a detailed outfit over the top of the character as well. I think there's one more after this. Oh yeah. So this is changing in the tints and the adjustments even further. So I'm messing with the shadows a little bit more after this, and this is pretty much what the final illustration ended up looking like. Yeah, you can see the way that the highlights got built into the cloth. One of the things that you might have noticed while I was working through my different layers within this piece is that I'm constantly working with a middle gray background. This is something that I highly recommend that you guys do for each one of your projects within this course. If you begin working on a project like this with a pure white background, a couple things are going to happen. 10 years down the line, you're going to completely burn your eyes out because it is just too bright. And what your parents tell you about watching TV in the dark, don't do it, right? And the other catch when you're working on a white background here is that you are naturally going to start to pick colors that are more saturated, that are more acidic, to be able to stand out against this white background. Whereas if you are working from a neutral gray background, you're going to be able to work slower into your brights. We'll get into good color choices as I actually start to paint within Photoshop this evening, but keep that as kind of a thumbtack in your mind. We're going to talk a lot about how to be able to pick good color choices within this course. So from here, that's your final, and that's your starting point. I hope this makes it pretty clear what it is that we're looking for this initial project, right? You're going from something that's really rough. You can see the problems that are going on within this sketch. We've talked about them. As you move into the digital realm, this is your opportunity to be able to improve upon that original project, that original sketch, and make it better and make it stronger and make it something that you're really proud of. All right. Whew, hope that gets you guys jazzed and excited for this course. Next up, we're going to go into Photoshop, and we are going to start looking at how to be able to set up our Photoshop documents, how to get brushes installed within Photoshop. So the first thing that I've done in here is I have just taken a photo with my phone, and it is this this sort of plane crash looking scene. And I've opened it within Adobe Photoshop. File open. Now, let's talk about file size within this class. So under the file in the top left-hand side, under image, I'm going to go to image size. Within this, we can see that right now my picture is 21 inches by 28 inches tall. I'm going to crop this down quite a bit more. So to be able to crop, if you've never done this within Photoshop, you've got this little tool underneath the magic wand. We're going to click on that guy. It brings up these. Don't be scared of them. They're not that big of a deal. And I'm going to start to crop in on my illustration. All right. So if I select the magnifying glass, I can go in and I can go to 100%. So that is the scale of this painting right now. I'm working on a pretty large Wacom tablet or Wacom screen at my house right now. But when I go back into image size, right now we've got this thing at 19 by 14. Yeah, it's a pretty good size. Usually, 20 by 40 inches is going to be where we want to work at within this course. So the next thing is the resolution. So again, that's under image size. Most of the photos that you take, if you're sending them to Facebook Messenger or downloading them, they are going to be at a resolution of 72 dpi. That is how many pixels per inch or whatever, or per millimeter that the file has. The general rule of thumb here is 300 is what printing presses are going to want to print in. So if you are printing off business cards, they want your logo and your emblem to be at 300 dpi. That's pretty huge. Okay, that's a lot of information. I think for most of you guys, if you're working on slightly older laptops or screens from your home, this is going to lag you quite a bit, especially as you start to use the smudge tool. We're already going to be, we're basically going to find a balance between image scale and the resolution here. Here's something cool about DPI. You can go up to 92. So 92 DPI will allow you to be able to upload to any website. HTML5, Web 2.0, whatever, all supports 92 DPI images. If you go up to 300 DPI or 150 DPI, you may have trouble getting those images to actually display on your websites when you go to build your portfolios at the end of college for your exit. So when you do upload these to the internet or to your website, you may want to consider deprecating these images back down to 72 DPI to be able to upload to the internet. And that'll make sure that they upload fast when someone actually clicks on your stuff, instead of it taking 30 seconds and then being like, oh my God, nothing's formatted right. For this particular scale, I'm going to go with 150 DPI. So it's not 300, it's not 92, it's sort of right in the middle there. And that should give me enough pixel depth information to be able to work pretty accurately here. All righty. So now that picture that I was working on at 100% scale is much, much larger. That's where we want to be. I'm in a good position now to go ahead and save this thing out since I've got it prepped. And let's get it as a Photoshop file. Anything that you guys are uploading to the discussion post and your final projects or final submissions throughout this course, please submit a PNG or a JPEG. I do not need to see your working Photoshop file. I only want to see your working Photoshop file if you guys are having some serious trouble with your projects. Otherwise, I am most interested in your final outcomes here and the final image. The first Avengers film. Welcome to the jungle. Avengers film was in the background for the visual effects houses that worked on it. It was completely held together with duct tape and chewing gum. It's all about what you get over to the client. Are they happy with it at the end? Is it a successful product? The next thing that we're going to look at here is to be able to get these files set up. Actually, let me back up a little bit here. Most of the time when you guys open up Photoshop, Photoshop over the years has become somewhat of a visual bully and hog. And you might see this entire right-hand side of your screen is completely taken up by stuff that Photoshop wants to throw your way. The top right-hand side here, you can go ahead and shrink those things down. For me, when I'm working, I'm here to work on this. I'm not here to look at all those weird graphs and charts that I'm never touching. So I try and minimize my work environment within Photoshop as much as I possibly can. What was it that I saw the other day? Oh yeah, here's a $1 million tip for you. If you are used to seeing Photoshop and they've got these small little layers that you can't quite see over the right-hand side, you can go up to this little hamburger menu under your layers that I've pulled out. And you've got panel options under this hamburger menu, just under where the X is at. Under the X hamburger menu, I'm just clicking on it, and you can see that panel options is there. When I click on panel options, my gosh, it gives you the ability to be able to change the scale of the thumbnail that's being displayed. Make them bigger, to make the layer thumbnails bigger, which is a total game changer. I didn't know about that for years. You're welcome. Next thing that I like to have out within my workspace is my navigator. The navigator is your best friend when it comes to being able to constantly get a bird's eye view of your composition. Sometimes, I don't recommend this, I recommend working loose and then into your details, but as you're working in and through your details, you might be looking at your painting like this and making some choices that we can't really see how it relates to the rest of the piece and the rest of the image. Your thumbnail is constantly going to give you a view of how your overall color space and choices are working and really helps you keep that bird's eye perspective. But for the most part, starting these drawings off, I would recommend staying really far back and not getting in too close. Nothing is worse than seeing, you know, the pixel artist that is like, you know, this close right at the very beginning of the painting, and then you've got, you know, 100% practically of the rest of the painting that you're not working on. Like I said, with those first examples, we're going to be building these entire illustrations in layers and in passes to be able to make them come together and to keep us working with maximum effectiveness. So the other thing that I've got out here is my brushes and my brush settings. I've also got my history if I need it. I find myself not using the history quite as much, especially since they allow you to be able to do Control-Z within Photoshop now. There was a time way back in the day, kids, when you weren't allowed to be able to do that. So let's start working our way towards actually doing some drawing. I know this is so much pomp and circumstance to get you guys set up, but again, a little bit hard to show you all this stuff just through a couple links and a brief project description. Next thing that I'm going to do with this painting open is I'm going to go to a duplicate layer. So I'm just clicking on my background image and I'm going to right click and go to duplicate layer. You can give it a new name, doesn't really matter here, but I'm going to turn off the visibility on my background layer. Again, I'm just sort of working non-destructively. I'm creating a new layer. There's a little trash can icon, and then you've got a square with a plus in it. When you click on that, you get new layers within Photoshop. The trash can now to be able to delete them, and that is the, you know, that's what's made this thing such a lasting program. Sorry. The next thing that I did was I'm picking that middle gray now. So for me, you're going to find that I like to just pick from the color swatch over here. You'll see many digital examples and tutorials throughout the semester where they've got the entire color wheel set out over there. I think it's not that big of a deal in this case to just be able to pick from this. Most of the time, I'm going to be drawing colors from my reference images, which I'm about to get the reference image into this picture as well. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about color right now and saturations. So remember at the beginning when I was talking about how if you work from a white background, a pure white, that it's going to burn your eyes out, kids. But the other thing is that you end up picking too saturated of colors. Well, as this semester goes on and we start to work from our reference images, I recommend that you guys continue to look at where the colors are coming from within these reference images that we are sampling colors from. Reference, not images, but reference illustrations, I should say. You guys don't want to use photographs for the most part in this project. I want you guys using illustration examples to be able to work on your illustrations. So at the same time, you're studying the brushwork, the layering, the texture usage, the artist interpretation through paint or through digital paint on how they are able to create these things instead of just working from realistic objects. All right. So there is something called the golden square here, and the golden square lives right around here. Think of this as kind of having a picture frame on the inside of it, and there's a smaller circle with some bleed or some gutter on the outside. As long as we're working within this area, this magic square that I keep on circling around, it's going to leave us with lots of room to be able to add those super bright whites. Do you guys know who Thomas Kinkade is? He's the artist that brought art to shopping malls. This guy. All right, so Thomas Kinkade, known as the painter of light. All of his pieces are just the coziest of cabin, beautiful, kind of almost surrealist fantasyland paintings. This guy, what he does is he has an entire crew, a warehouse of artists that he is trained to paint in his style. And all he does within his paintings is he goes back and he adds the white to the paintings. So Thomas Kinkade only comes in at the very end and adds the little white highlights within the piece. The white is happening at the very end of these projects. That should be the goal for you guys as well, that we are really not having to use that much pure white within our paintings. If you've got a color like this, that should more than satisfy your brightest section, so that when you do add that super white or that super saturated color over here, it really, really is for the exclamation point. It's for the most exciting emphasis part of the painting. And we do not want to work super acidic like this throughout the entire composition. We want to work with more muted grays. It's going to feel a little bit strange at first. You'll be surprised how dark you can go to still get variations, but as we continue to sample from our reference images, we're going to get some good stuff in here. So the middle gray is all the way over to the left-hand side, and it is roughly right here in the middle of your color picker. Hit OK, and then I'm going to select my fill tool, and I'm just going to fill this. So after this, we've got our middle gray laid in there. Next thing is I've got my sketch, but I do not want to be working on top of the sketch. This is still too bright for me. And the other big thing here is that my lines are entirely too black. So we've got these super black lines here. And if I'm working even in a colored brush for my initial sketch digitally, it's going to fight. I want the sketch to fade into the background. So I am taking my opacity with my layer selected over here in my layers panel, and I'm turning down the opacity a lot. All right, so this is down to 15%. At this point, I can still see my sketch, right? The sketch is still visible, but now as I start to add new and final line work within this piece, it's going to stand out on top of it, and I can actually make some new decisions without having to fight against this sketch. Also, this sketch here is a great example of a thumbnail. Within this class, you guys are going to be asked to thumbnail out your ideas quite a bit. And within the project descriptions, I've talked a lot about what good thumbnails actually are. I've seen a lot of really, really bad thumbnails and bad sketches over the years for this starting point within your piece. Now, if you're turning into your art director, a couple stick people standing there, no facial expressions, no body poses, no clothing, no hair indication of anything like that, and no background. Your art director is going to say, okay, what is that? Because they can't read it and they can't actually see it. This thumbnail that you see on the screen, I'll turn it back up right now since we're talking about this, does a great job of, within a 5-minute drawing, of helping someone be able to understand what is going on within the scene. So we've got a plane that is balancing on a tree that's up on a stone pillar around some other stone pillars within a tropical area. You know what helps this even more? Having a reference image to go along with it, to be able to say, okay, boss, you know, here's what I'm thinking for the general like shapes and forms of the composition. And then here's my reference image to give you an idea of the color space and the rendering style that we're going to be able to do. Those two things combined really will make your art directors, your higher ups, your other coworkers really happy, because at this very beginning stage, helps people give feedback and get an idea of what direction you're heading in. Do not give people surprises within a professional, very heavily deadline-driven studio. People like to know where it is that you're heading and what's going on with these pictures that you're getting paid to do. The old adage is fail fast. You know, be able to make your mistakes early on in the development phase. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to be able to correct early on. So if I went through and like painted this entire thing, or if I don't have an initial sketch, then I'm going to have to, that's really thought through, then I'm going to have a lot of trouble later on when there's details that I haven't thought through, when I'm starting to get tired, when I've got other stuff going on. Take those first 5 minutes in your first, pitch at these thumbnails and really develop them out so that they are communicating thoroughly all the things that you need to know within these paintings. I'll show you an example here. This is the 2-color illustration. All right. This is it. Yeah, this is it. Cool. So this was this one right here. I hope that you guys are able to see it all right. I don't know why it's not letting me zoom in. This was the initial sketch that I did for a painting that I wanted to develop. And it's got a witch on the right-hand side, or a fortune teller, that's telling this old exhausted knight his fortune, and it's not a good fortune, and he's just already defeated. He's been through so much, he's sick of fighting, and then, he can't escape his fate that he's being told here. The fortune teller on the right-hand side, pretty well developed. We can see she's got some little horns here. We've got these objects within the background. There's some netting. We've got the objects on the table laid out pretty well. There's an insignia on the table. We've got the cards. We've got where the candles are going to be. The knight, on the other hand, I could have spent a lot more time developing out this knight's armor, and my final painting would have come out much, much better. I wish I had done that. This was the big mistake that I made with this painting. The painting turned out looking like this. Okay, so it's a solid painting. The 2-color scheme that I'm using here, this is one of your projects later on down the line, is the oranges and the reds and then the blues work together. There's a really cool sense of lighting happening with this, but the armor itself, really not that developed. There's some parts here around the shoulder, and the plates on the legs are just sort of there. They're just sort of hanging out. Whereas she looks great. She's got a really cool painting going on within the horns and the beak, and all those little elements that were in the sketch show up very nicely, but this fella could have used a little bit more work on his armor. I'll show you another example of what a good sketching method looks like for the tonal black and white. All right, so this one, I really struggled with it. In the beginning, I was trying to do this mech, and you can see me sketching it out. The shapes are all wrong. Tried it a second time on the character, on the big robot's head. Didn't quite work, and I was trying to do the entire background along with the robot all at once. It just wasn't happening for me. So within my sketching phase and developing out this big robot over here, Gundam, whatever you want to call it, I had to do the main 3 elements within this piece separately. I needed to design my background separately. I needed to have some space to be able to work just on the mech, and then I needed some more space to be able to work on the character as well. And you can see how I'm pulling each one of these out to be able to develop them. This was the trick for me to be able to make this drawing actually work. And this is all during the thumbnail phase of this painting. If I hadn't done this, you can see just how gangly my robot's looking. He doesn't quite line up with the rest of my piece. This one was just a quick fail. But finally, on the 3rd try and separating it out and just working on this drawing that I was trying to create, I got him, and he looks really, really good. Now, what I went through and did was, from this thumbnailing and the sketching phase, is go through and combine all of this within Photoshop. This is the great part about working within Photoshop. So we've got a little bit of a collage here from those 3 photos that I created. It gives me the chance to be able to scale and push and move around some of the characters. So this guy is sitting here on the handrail. The big robot, I get to mess with the scale of how big it's going to be and where it's going to fit in within the background. And then this is how that painting turned out at the very end. Yeah, I think it worked pretty well working that way. So, but that would not have happened if I had not started with a good, well-developed sketch. That's the moral of the story. Hope you guys understand where I'm coming from with that. I know we're working from old sketches into digital drawings here, but it's something to be aware of. Do the work early on within the sketching phase for these projects, and your projects will come together, and they will really sing, and they're going to look terrific. Now, the next thing. Oh. Okay, I don't know why I had to save that twice. The next thing here is I'm going to drop in my reference image now for this piece. So let's go in, and I'm going to use that crop tool a second time, now that I've got the general scale of my piece figured out. And as I start to pull it out over to the right-hand side, well, you can see I get that secondary color swatch or piece of color that starts to show up. I can do this in black. I can do it in whatever color I want. But the big gray scale for my canvas that I created previously is still going to be there. So I just created a new layer underneath what my actual canvas layer is, if you want to call it something, canvas. And then we can also right-click within here and start color coding. So underneath the eyeball, if you right-click on it, you can give it quite a few different colors. And that can help you start to organize your piece more. You'll notice I am not a folder or a mask user within Photoshop. It's just, for my particular workflow, not something that I've ever really used. There's a reason for that. To be able to get around layers quickly within Adobe Photoshop, what I like to do is turn off. So I hit V on the keyboard. My brush. So I'm going to hit V on the keyboard, and that brings me into my selector. Within the selector tool, you might find that this little thing, auto select, is turned on. You want to turn off the auto select under the select tool. There's a good reason for this, because we want to have some control. One of the required pieces for this project is that you have a mouse with a middle mouse, not just for this project, for this course. When the required pieces of equipment is not just having a mouse, but having one that has a middle mouse wheel as well as a right-click button, and here's why. So with that right-click button with the auto select turned off and grabbing your select tool within Photoshop, when you right-click on your canvas, it's going to bring up all the layers within that region underneath. So we can see that that canvas layer that I just created, the canvas layer, is there. So I can also select the background copy, which is my reference image. Right-click, reference image. Over here on the right-hand side, if I try and select anything, you can see that that canvas layer and the reference image are no longer here when I right-click within this section, because they are not underneath my mouse. So this becomes a very easy way to be able to, if you're trying to get into your shadow layer, hover over where your shadow layer is, right click, and you should be able to get to it very, very fast. This is a much faster way of instead of digging through hundreds of layers over here on the right-hand side, how we quickly move to the layers that we want to work on and adjust them within Photoshop. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between keyboard shortcuts, my stylus pen, as well as the mouse. This is not just working in the stylus pen the entire time. We are using a keyboard, the mouse, and the stylus pen. This is sort of the standard professional creative setup. that you're going to see out there. All right, so from here, let's get that reference image into my piece. And we'll talk a little bit about good reference image selection. So file, import, or place. Okay, cool. And here is my reference image. I do not need this to be absolutely massive. It can be much smaller. I'm really just here for the colors. And you'll notice the reference image that I'm using on the right side is set up strikingly similar to the composition that I have. I'm not sure when this occurs for digital artists when you get to college. When you were in high school, you're working from still lifes, you were copying images out of magazines, you were working from, maybe looking in a mirror and doing a self-portrait, but you had references. And then all of a sudden you become a college student and you think, well, I need to be able to pull all of this stuff completely out of my head. It needs to come from the ether. And each one of these pieces that I pull completely from the ether is going to be the best work that I've ever created. And I do not need to, sample other artists' work. I'm using this setup here to show you guys that that's never been the case within all of design, within the entire world of producing art. Everything is derivative. Everything is pulling from this conversation within the design world and taking things one step further. So way back in the day, during like the 1800s, 1600s, artists would go into museums and they would set up their easels. You can still do this to this day. And you can paint directly in front of these master works. And the idea was that you are channeling the sort of energy coming out of these paintings that these masters created into your own painting and your own canvas. Well, they were doing the same thing. They were copying the colors, the brush techniques, the compositional layout and studies, and they were going back and then applying this to their own original works. And that is how we're going to be working within this course. You do not have to come up with this stuff out of the ether, but it certainly does help to be able to gather good reference illustrations. So this means if you've got a character that's, I don't know, it's got a character's face in there, get you some references for how to draw a character's face. There's nothing more annoying than seeing a student that still doesn't know how to do proper character faces. Go out and find you some references on DeviantArt, on ArtStation of good character design structures and faces that you like. And then, use that method of starting really sketchy in the beginning and then building into and really referencing those character proportions that you like. Study the eye shape, study the mouth shape, study the way that they're doing the lips. How are they shading underneath the nose? How are they really doing the hair to be able to make it a good, successful shape? These are the critical things that you need to look at as you move from art as a hobby and something that you love as a child into being a professional designer and a professional artist, to be able to really understand the mechanics of the things that you're referencing and how to be able to apply those in a successful way into the composition that you are trying to create. All right, that's a lot on that. Next up, let's go in and let's start doing some line work here. For the line work, you guys are welcome to use brushes however you want. I'm going to be working on top of my reference image, so I'm just going to go ahead and color that one red. And let's get into this thing. So with the brushes, there's a video under Module 1, and there's also files at the very bottom of Module 1. Let me show you where those two are at, so there's no confusion. All right, for how to install brush packs. This is the first video I think that shows up under the description of Module 1. This is a short, maybe 4-minute long video at the most. I think it's less than that, maybe 2 minutes, for how to be able to get brushes installed within Photoshop if you've never done that before. Down at the bottom here, Please take note of these. You're going to see within each one of these modules, there are files attached to them. We've got where the discussion posts are at. These two, the ABR files, are your brush packs that I like to use. These are some free brush packs that exist out there. You're going to need to download each one of those and install it onto your computer. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But other things that I give you guys for each one of these projects is you're going to see that there are Photoshop files. So old to new sunset project, that's one of them that I showed you. The Silks project is in there. And I've also got write-ups for kind of the thinking steps that I took while I was working through these projects, things that were working, things that weren't working. So you've got Photoshop files of my previous working files so that you can kind of open those, look at the mechanics of what's going on the inside of the file. It's a little bit confusing looking in there, but as long as you know that this is how I'm building stuff, right? I'm going into things and I'm right-clicking and then going to the reference image. I'm right-clicking and going to these different layers. It's going to help get you there a lot faster instead of being completely overrun by, layer 65 that doesn't make much sense. You can see how I'm building into these paintings. Okay, so I hope that stuff is useful for you. And yeah, give those things a read, download the Photoshop files. They're in there for each one of the projects. And hopefully that gives you kind of something else to be able to lean on within here. But let's get the brushes, show you how to install the brushes within Photoshop. So maybe this isn't showing up at first for you, but we're going to go into Window, drop down, and we're going to go into Brushes. All right. So under our brushes, you can see that I've already got those two installed, but I'm going to very quickly and easily show you how to be able to do it. From here, we're going to go into that hamburger menu again. So just where we were able to change the scale of the icons within our layers, that little hamburger menu, unsuspecting as it may be, holds a lot of really great stuff. So under that little hamburger menu, that's where you're going to find import brushes. Again, we're going under Window, Brushes. Pops open this little thing. It might come out at the side. You can pull it out. And then we're going to click on the hamburger menu right here. And I'm going to scroll down to Load Brushes, or Import Brushes, excuse me. Okay. Click on your brush pack. This one's 11,000 or 11 megabytes. This one's 28 megabytes. And you just hit load. And bada bing, bada boom, it's that simple to be able to get you a whole bunch of brushes within your project. The brushes that I like an awful lot here are any of them that say Legendary on the side. The chip brush is an absolutely great brush as you start to go through. Let's go into this one. Yeah. So we're going to see these MB Line Art Legendary. Pretty outstanding brush, really, really fun to use. But let's give you a little bit more of a crash course on the brushes within Photoshop. All of the brushes in the world are not going to make you a good painter. This is the same idea that if you are into kayaking, that if you buy the $3,000 kayak versus the $800 one at Dick's Sporting Goods, that you are going to be a better kayaker because you have a $3,000 kayak. Having all the brushes in the world is not going to make you a better painter. You can get a lot done with this hard round brush within Photoshop. This is the OG, this is your best friend here. The soft round brush, the airbrush under your brushes, is really rarely used. We're not going to use that too much. I see students a lot within illustration use this soft round brush, and then everything looks like a t-shirt that they got done at the beach in Panama City. It looks a little bit tacky. And if you'll find that if we overuse any of these tools within Photoshop, that professional artists are going to be able to spot it from a mile away, and it's going to be kind of a glaring problem. We'll talk about that with the smudge tool as well as the burn and the dodge tool later on within this course. But the hard round brush is your best friend. So let's get this brush working a little bit better. So right now, on my layer 3, if I draw, we've got this guy. It's going to create one long line. Ooh, I've already got it set up. But now that I'm using my stylus, you see if I go lighter, and if I press down harder, the line gets thicker. Now it's getting thinner and lighter. How do you do something like this? And why would you want to? The reason why you want to set up your lines like this is it mimics a real world pencil. It mimics a real world tool, to where the harder that you press down, the more gradient or shadow it is that you're creating and you're getting along the way. And it's sort of bridges the gap between this digital stuff. Without turning these things on, you are really putting yourself at a disadvantage when it comes to digital artwork. So what I'm going to do first is I've got my brush settings. That's one that I like to keep out over here on the side if I want to adjust anything. If you do not have this little guy available, you're going to go under Windows, and where we found brushes, just above that, or hitting F5 on your keyboard, you can bring up the brush settings. So notice how I'm finding a lot of this stuff under the window drop down. We've looked at the brushes, how to import our brush packs. Most of the brushes that I'm going to be picking from are just going to be from this drop down over here. Is how I like to get to them. Some artists like to have theirs already out within their menu. That's the cool thing about Photoshop. It is a platform, a sandbox for artists to be able to work in their own creative process. That's one of the big reasons why it's stuck around within this industry for over 20 years. Brush settings under Windows, brush settings, H5. The two main ones that you're mostly going to work with are going to be the shape dynamics. So under the brush tip and shape, just under there, we're going to click on shape dynamics. And under shape dynamics, we are going to go to the drop down if this is turned off, and we want to set it to pin pressure. If you get this little warning sign, it just means that you need to tap on your screen, and all of a sudden Photoshop is recognizing that you are indeed using a stylus pin that has a pin pressure sensitivity to it. And that'll start to pop up. You can see that the shape of the brush changed from just a flat to this sort of nice, it's just more visually appealing. The next one is transfer. So if you do not have transfer turned on, then that you need to go in there and turn this one on. Transfer being turned on for your final line work is not the best idea. A lot of times it's good to have the transfer turned off. My Photoshop's being absolutely bizarre, and transfer is always turning itself on. But yeah, when you're doing your final line work, to have nice, clean, solid, you know, animation ready line work coming out of Photoshop, then you want the transfer to be turned off so that it does not get lighter the lighter that you press, and it stays one solid hue or tone, sorry, the entire time. Okay. There we go. So that is your basic brush setup. For your round brush, when we're sketching, we want to have the transfer turned on and the shape dynamics. The next thing that's really important here is under our brushes up at the top, there's a couple different things that we can do. Number one, I used to think for years that, you know, adding smoothing to your lines was cheating. Turns out it's not. You can have the hands of a surgeon, and these Wacom tablets, Apple Pad, whatever it is that you're using to be able to paint, is going to it's going to give you these little wigglies. And like we saw previously, when we're working digitally, we're going to find that people zoom in a lot more in these paintings, and these paintings need to be able to hold up at a higher resolution than likely anything you have ever created before previously. For that reason, turning on smoothing is a great idea. All right, let me give you a quick example for this. So I'm just going to go in. For my initial sketch, I like to work with a colored brush while moving from my original sketch into my digital, more polished sketch. So I'm going to try and pull a line here around the back of the plane. That's with no smoothing on. Okay, let's go into this and look at it. And as we start to getting close, I don't know if you guys can tell, let's change the color just so that we can really dissect this line. We use blue. We can see that there is a little bit of a bend here. There's a little bit of a wiggly here. There is a little bit of an uptick here. And that one smooth line that I just pulled in like, no time at all, less than half a second, it's still coming out ripply. And that was like as clean as a pull of a line as you're going to get. That was like really, really nice. But it doesn't come out quite that clean when you're working digitally. So that's where the smoothing comes in. So I am going to turn on my smoothing to like 20% within Photoshop. Got a neon, this super acidic neon green here, just so that we can see the difference. I brush my eyes. All right. And from there, on a new layer that I've created, we can see that our smoothing has gotten rid of those little ripples. There's still a little bit of a down bend there, which I'm pretty okay with that. But as we look through this entire line, it is much, much cleaner than what we're getting without the smoothing turned on. Okay, so for me, that's pretty good. I would let that one slide and let it continue to live as a final piece of line within this piece. Sometimes you'll see memes and stuff out there that, oops, are jokingly showing like an artist trying to pull a line 1,000 different times within a painting, and it never turns out quite right. Yes, they can turn on the smooth tool. That's a good way to be able to work. Another way to be able to do line stuff, if you're just getting stuck here and you can't quite seem to pull it correctly, is I'm going to use the pen tool. So this is a good sort of cheat sheet here. So I'm on the same layer as my green line for the outline of my plane, and I'm going to use my pen tool. So I'm no longer using my stylus. I'm using my mouse now and my left click with the pen tool selected. And I'm going to go back here and I am going to start making some corrections to that sketch for the plane. I'm holding down my left click to be able to round out my pen tool, and I'm moving forward. A little bit of a roundness there at the back. That might not be quite the way that I want it to be, but here we go. And let's get a little bit of roundness going on there. And I think that's pretty good for this line. So this complex shape that I've just designed here with my pen path, I'm going to now right click, again, this is why you need the mouse, and I'm going to go to not fill path, but stroke path. I do not want to use the pencil. I'm not working with the pencil. I'm working with the brush. And I'm going to select the brush here. My cat is starting to cry at me right now. Okay, and with the brush selected under stroke path, well, hello. We've got a special guest star tonight. You can see that it's gone in and it's drawn this perfect line right here. And the line is quite a bit thicker than what I was actually drawing a second ago. So you might have to do this more than once. So that means I'm just going to hit B on my keyboard to bring the brush back up. And I'm going to change the size of the brush. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can right click and go to the brush size. I find this to be a little bit tricky to zero it in right where you want it to be. The way that I like to work to be able to change the brush size is to, again, be able to use the keyboard. And you've got your brackets on the keyboard. Those are those two shapes that are right to the right of the P button on your keyboard. And the bracket to the right is going to make your brush bigger. The bracket to the left is going to make your brush smaller. And that is a very quick way that I like to work to be able to change the brush size on the fly. So now I'm going to go back here. My cat is being the biggest ham right now. And I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to go to stroke path with my pen tool selected with my path still available. And I'm going to go to stroke path, and I'm going to create a brush. There we go. So now we've got a line that is much more in line with the scale that I created previously. And you can see that looks pretty clean, no ripples. It's super, super straight. And this can help you get around some of those tricky areas. If you use it all the time, you are going to be forfeiting that nice ebb and flow for the thicker lines to the thinner lines within your pieces, and they can start to look very mechanical when you do not when you're only using the pen tool, but it can help sometimes if it's a little bit tricky for you to be able to get this stuff in there. So hitting B on the keyboard again to get back to the brush. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really need to show you guys with this step. Scale of the brushes, pen, working the color. We'll get here in just a moment, but let me go in and I'm going to finish off this airplane. While I'm doing my sketch, I've got a pretty good idea of how I want this plane to work. Notice I'm leaving some little areas open. I'm not trying to fill in every single little detail here. I want the plane to have a little bit of a cartoon shape to it. And I can always put this bush, this is going to be some of the foliage from the tree that it's landed in, on a different layer. For now, this is the great part about working in Photoshop, right? I'm just going to go ahead and fill in that section of the plane. Let's make a better line there. I just hit Control-Z, be able to get rid of that line. And I just want to fill in the shape of this plane. There you go. I like the front. Again, we've got some foliage here, connecting these two guys. All right. Hey, buddy. Hi. You are not going to bother me right now. Okay. So from here, just going to draw it down very, very lightly. Can always go in and clean up these lines further. But that's working for my wing shape. And then I've got, oh, that one's hard to draw. All right. There we go. Not going to get the lines right every single time. That's okay. Okay. So we've got the shape of an airplane. There is still probably some polish and cleanup that I can go through and do with this line work here. I'm just sort of looking at it and looking for what looks a little bit messy. That can look a little bit better. And this is a good time for me to go in and you see some of that stuff around there is a little bit messy as well. And then we've got this line that's creeping off the edge. Just don't want that to happen. Okay, so just some quick cleanup. I'm holding down the Alt button on my keyboard with the magnifying glass selected to be able to quickly zoom in and out here. Alt is going to allow me to zoom out, and then I've also got my navigator, which allows me to be able to move around very quickly too. Now, from here, let's pretend that we have got our airplane finalized. Normally, I would go through and I would do all the line work within my scene. I'm blocking out different things. So I'm going to go in and on the next layer, let's go in and just do my plants a different color. This is very reminiscent of how animators like to work within Toon Boom Harmony, where you've got different layers. And different pieces. All right, so these two guys. Oh yeah, here's a great one. So one of the things that I just did is I am left clicking, okay, with my mouse, and then I'm holding down Shift. Now from there, when I go through and click to my next location, Photoshop is going to draw a straight line for me across. This is a really, really great technique, similar to using that pen brush tool. And that's going to allow me to be able to enclose my shape. Let me give you a quick little demo on what that looks like here. So again, I am selecting a new layer. All right, there's point A. I've just left clicked with my mouse, and now I'm going to hold down the Shift button on my keyboard, and with the Shift button held down at a different point, I can start drawing lines. If I hold down Shift again, it'll continue from the last point, and I can start to create some pretty nice shapes this way. Each time you can hear me going through and selecting. Okay. So with this, select a point, hold down Shift, and then that, as you start to actually move the mouse, will allow you to only be able to draw on one plane or one direction. Watch that again. So I'm going to select once. There's my red dot. And this time I'm going to go up and down. By holding down Shift when I select, now I start to move my mouse, and I can't go left and right. I can only go up and down. So this allows you to be able to make perfect horizontals and perfect verticals within Photoshop each time, so that you're not having to pull drawings straight up. And then if you need to do a diagonal, well, you're going to select once, go down to your next point, hold down Shift, and that'll be your diagonal. Hold down Shift, and then I can draw my horizontal across. This point again, holding down Shift and pulling my mouse to be able to make a perfect triangle each time. That technique right there will save you a whole heap of time. So as I'm going through and I'm creating my line work, you can see that I've got the plain base over here. Let's just give it a color so that we can see it easily on the side. And then I'm starting to create my trees. Okay, so I'm doing another pass on my trees. In each one of these, I'm trying to enclose these shapes the best I can, and I'm being mindful of how my colors are going to build within this painting as well. So there's my plane, got my tree over the top of it. I'm just going to do a little bit more tree here so that we can get the idea for the foliage and hopefully paint some of that. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to try and draw quick for you. So you notice how each one of these drawings, for the foliage, I'm kind of doing it Dr. Seuss-like. And creating an interesting rhythm. One big pull, lift my mouse or lift my stylus. That's a bad line, Control Z. What I'm trying to do here is use those rules of calligraphy. If any of you guys have ever practiced or tried calligraphy before, 2,000 years old, right? And all they did was lettering. And with that, there is an energy that they're trying to convey with each one of their brush marks and strokes within calligraphy. Each thing is supposed to have a nice flow to it. And this is sort of the key when it comes to good brush and mark making. Varying my lines just a little bit, give it a little shape. Feels pretty good to me. All right, so all this stuff is going right around the edge. Move the plane, tracing around it. Sure, there's a better way to do this. But the point I'm trying to get across to you guys is that we are enclosing the shapes that we are creating here, right? So they are closed shapes. This is going to be important for me to be able to work here in a little bit. And then let's just get a little bit more of that color. I really like that over there, but it needs something that sort of ties the whole thing that the plane is really in the tree. And for me, when I'm working through a painting like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all of my line work. So I'm going to work like this, get all of my line work in there. Say the tree is going to be green, trees line. Your next step, go ahead and hit Control S. Save often, kids. It'll save you a lot of time. Is I'm going to start putting in that flat color. Easy ways to be able to do that and color quickly. Let's color in the plane right now and do that at an accelerated rate. Right now, you guys might approach this as now I need to go in and I'm going to paint on the inside of this plane. And let's look at my reference image instead of trying to pull those colors out of my own head. And I'm going to be looking for something within this area that is sort of a middle color. Okay, so here's my reference image. This is the color space that I'm using. And that is, we've got some darks in there, but this is a good sort of shadow middle color. Again, I'm clicking on my color swatch over here on the left-hand side. And what do you know? That middle color starts to exist within that magic square that we were talking about a moment ago. So we're going to do some wizardry here. And that particular color is a gray, right? So this is hitting in our gray zone. It's not super saturated. I'm going to take the saturation out of that gray. And let's give it a little bit more blue. So down here at the bottom, no, too dark. Dark. There we go. Too blue. There we go. I think that'll work pretty well for me for a plain, sort of metal plane coloring. Okay. So if you were to go through and start coloring in this jet, well, tell you what you don't want to do. Oh gosh, I got the fuzzy brush. That's an awful start for that. You want to continue to use the hard brush as well. Under my brushes, I'm just dropping down, making sure that I'm on my hard brush. Hitting B on the keyboard to get back into the brush. And the last thing that you want to do here is be going in and I've got the mixer brush turned on right now, which is what I do not want. I don't think that's going to slow us down too much tonight for this demo. Make sure that you've got your regular brush selected. So let's show, moving forward, let me show you the right way to be able to get these things colored quickly. So if you have done a good job and you have colored in this plane, you've got everything kind of connected on it. Instead of going through and tracing around the outside of this plane meticulously, what we can do, this is a faster way to do it. I've got my plain line art. If you are doing paintings with no line art, then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to rough in the shape, get the outline, and then you're going to fill this way throughout the semester, and it's going to save you oodles of time. So please pay attention to this. I'm using my magic wand tool, and within the magic wand tool, I have just clicked one time and it selected everything on the inside of the airplane. I'm going to hold down Shift while I've got my magic wand tool selected to be able to add to my selection. I can also go through here and then hold down the Alt key, just like I did with the magnifying glass, to be able to deselect things from my selection. So Shift adds, holding down Alt removes. Got it? You're going to find the same thing for the lasso tool. All of Photoshop and a lot of the Adobe products are set up that way. Now, this is on my plain line art layer. From here, I want to create a new layer just under my line art layer and go in and fill it. Well, that was quick and easy, right? But as we start to zoom in here, hopefully you guys can see this, we should see some issues. Well, tonight it seems to be working all right. But to avoid these issues, if you are using a fuzzy brush, a textured brush, anything like that, to really be able to get the line work to, or sorry, the fill color to fill this plane accurately and quickly, here's a little pro tip for you. So we're going to go down to the selection drop-down, which is someplace I bet you have never really been within Photoshop. And from there, we're going to go to Select, Modify, Expand. So I'm going to do the Select drop-down, Modify, Expand, and I'm going to expand my selection by 3 to 4 pixels. Let's go with 4 pixels because we're working at 150 DPI. And that is going to expand that selection just enough to where we get a much cleaner fill that goes underneath the line work. And this is a much smarter way to work. I'm going to show you a second time. Here's the trees. Oops. Get my trees layer selected. Trees, 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 and trees. Same deal. Image. Nope. Select, modify, expand. Expand by 4. Hit OK. So now I've got a good selection there. Under my trees layer, the green layer over here, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm hitting I on the keyboard to go into my color picker, right? Just by hitting the I key on the keyboard, like I will, I can go in and I can select that green, that middle green that's right here. Again, we talked about the middle colors and how important those are when you're working. Let me double check. Yep, and that green is changing as we move up. So there's a little bit of gradient going on there, which is a great thing. I like that. Let's use this green. It's not overly saturated, right? It's not in the very top right-hand side. It's not on the right-hand side of the color picker where it's more saturated. We're really kind of in that safe middle gray space, which is exactly where we want to be. If it's way too saturated over the right-hand side, it's probably going to come off as acidic and start to hurt people's eyes, and that's not really what we want, especially in these starting stages for a middle tone. Okay. So from there, I've got my new layer created just under my tree line art layer. I've expanded my selection, and now I'm going to go in and I'm going to fill it. Now, sometimes within Photoshop, it just can't quite get into the little nooks and crannies. So you'll notice, even with that technique, we've still got a little bit of cleanup to do here right at the end of these. But this is saving you a tremendous amount of time. Messier, not quite what we want. That should be on the inside there. Maybe expanding it by 2 is better for this painting. And we're not quite getting those little tendrils down at the very end. Check. Yeah, that's what we don't want to see, is them not filling in all the way. Okay. See, when that's not quite filled in, sorry about this. And there we go. All right, we're looking good here. There's a good reason why I want to make sure that those shapes are working well. Those are our sort of base shapes. So we've got the green and the gray filled in just as quickly as we possibly can. Here's another great tip. If you are working in color with your line work, that's looking a little bit not quite as smooth as I would like for it to be, then I can go in and I can double click within this gray negative space on my piece, just to the right of the text or anywhere around the text. Click on the text, it'll let you change the text, which we don't want to do. We want to get this up. All right, so this screen is our layer style screen. There's all kinds of effects and things that you can do within here. After Effects has this, Illustrator has this, and this is a pretty powerful tool when, again, not overused. If you drop gradient overlays and on everything, people are going to know that you put gradient overlays on everything. This is where the over bevel from the early 2000s graphics comes from. That just makes stuff look tacky and dated. So subtlety, a subtle hand here is a great way to be able to work. Use it practically and not too much. All right, so what I want to do, I've got my line art layer selected. Again, I've just double clicked within the negative space here to bring up my layer styles. And I'm going to select color overlay. And what do you know? That quickly, I can go in here and I can start to change the color of that line work. So now it is no longer the super, green or whatever it was before. Yeah, green color. Now we've got a gray overlay on the lines. Next thing, with the tree, we've got our bright red outline on the tree. I'm going to go in and I'm going to go to color overlay. It's trying to bring up the last color that I had there, but because this method, and I've separated my pieces out, I can go in and change the color with no problem. So I'm just going down and over just a little bit so that my line work is not just black, but instead I've got a colored line work within my piece. You can see how nice that looks with the dark green and the dark blue within my work. Okay, so at this point, we can no longer see our initial sketch. Well, you can still go in and you can, since we're working at 15% for that initial sketch, and you can start to drop it down even further as we're starting to get in some of the details within this so that it doesn't create that big of a differential. But I wanted to show you guys tonight, so you are good and set up to be able to work through these things, what the next step looks like. Here's another really great pro tip. So this is one of the reasons why we go in and we separate out the line work on a different layer from the flat color. So that flat middle tone that we're working from becomes our base, right? This is what we're going to be building all of our different colors and values into. Here's the cool part. So when I double click on the thumbnail image for that, it is going to it's going to bring up my layer styles again. That's not where I want to be this time. Instead, I want to hold down the control button on the keyboard and double click on that thumbnail image of my plane. This is the layer with the flat gray. I'll just give it a name, flat gray plane. Okay. Now when I hold down control and click on that layer, I get a selection around the outside of it. And that selection is really going to help me a lot so that I can quickly start painting in those initial shadow passes on my plane. From here, I'm going to open up my plane. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that initial flat gray so that I'm working non-destructively. And now I can go in and I can start to, got my initial gray here. Let's go in and let's pick something that is a little bit darker. All right. That looks pretty good and dark. And I'm going to come up just a little bit. All right, I really like that color a lot. So instead of just using one that's totally connected to it, we're using a little bit more color theory. So we're getting some atmosphere, some blues within the shadow, which is nice. And now the next thing that I'm going to do here is on this new layer, I'm going to turn down the opacity. I have no idea how I got onto the mixer brush. We have got to get rid of that guy. Aha, there it goes. All right, there's my normal brush tool. Sometimes changing around your workspace, if you are ever missing those little triangles down at the bottom within your toolbox, changing the workplace will bring them back up. I have no idea why they disappear sometimes, but that is that's your trick to be able to get those triangles up. So if you're ever missing your dodge tool, your smudge tool, your burn tool, that's how you get back to it. So now we are back to our normal brush. Thank goodness we've got our smoothing still turned on to 20%. Now we can drop down the opacity from 100%, and I like working with this initial shadow pass around the 50%, 55. I want to be able to make some decisions, but I don't need to entirely lock it in yet as I go in and start to really sort of define the shape and the value of this plane. One useful thing for the illustration that I have here over on the right-hand side is I've got a strong sense of lighting. The light is coming from the top left-hand side. You should think about where the lighting is coming from within your paintings. And so now, just that quickly, I can go in and on this new layer, start painting in some of these shapes and some of these values. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that Photoshop is leaving artifacts here all throughout my painting, right? So it is giving me extra little details that I do not actually want, some brush shapes that are going on within here. This is, again, my first pass within the shadows, so I'm going to be working down deeper into these later on. And that is acting crazy tonight. And so now I've turned my brush down to 27%, and I'm just going to do another quick little pass over the edge of it, creating this rough gradient going across my piece. All right, and I'm just sort of exploring here and getting some ideas. It's really like a secondary sketch that's going on and figuring out where my values and hues are going to be. Now I can really kind of slowly build up and create just the beginning of gradients within this thing. All right, so there we go. We've got our initial plane, and we can see all these different bands that are going on here. Well, I don't really want these bands in my final painting, so what I'm going to end up doing is using something called the smudge tool. The smudge tool is your best friend. It's really great. I've got it set to, I think, the chip brush or something like that. This one works pretty well for me to be able to quickly smudge out along my painting, where I am just going through and very quickly breaking up those bands. Now, sometimes you want to leave a hard edge within your painting. Other times you don't. But this is giving me the option to be able to have that conversation with my piece. If I am working with my illustration, if I'm working with just the fuzzy brush the entire time, I don't get to have that conversation. Fuzzy brush has decided that everything is going to be nice and soft, and we don't really get any kind of textural strokes left within the paintings. You can see here that I'm just going back. I went up and down at first, and now I'm going through and getting rid of some of those. And I'm getting a lot more texture happening with it within this piece. Think for this, softening it up. So there are other brushes that we can use for the brush tool, or sorry, for the smudge tool to make this softer, but I'm just working my way through those gradients at first, and that helps quite a bit. All right, so now we're starting to get a rounded shape going on with our airplane. I would go through and I would do the shadow pass across the initial shadow pass without using the smudge tool across all the different layers within this painting, and then I would go back and work the smudge tool through each section. And then I would start working it in on my highlights. So again, I'm going to use that same trick as before. Let's go in with the dark green here. Sorry, the green for the foliage on the trees. I'm holding down Control, clicking on the icon, grabbing one of my greens. Again, I'm hitting I on the keyboard, and I am not picking these colors from my color swatch. Instead, I'm pulling all of my colors from different areas and sections. New layer for the shadows. Taking all these colors from my reference image. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here at all. And again, this is not the darkest shadow that I see within my painting. This is a second sort of middle color that's going on. One thing that helps to be able to develop this entire process at one time, and why we work in these big steps, is if you can get too detailed here, right? So right now, this is the only thing on my painting. And if I sit here and detail out every one of these little pieces of tree within this, well, once I get to my foreground, then I'm going to have to get really, really detailed. So working in these giant passes really helps you a lot to be able to focus on the entire composition at one time. I don't want to overly render out this painting. Another thing I want you guys to keep in mind too is something called the 70-30 rule. 70-30 rule, we're going to talk a lot about that throughout this semester. It is the general idea that 70% of your composition is there to get the viewer to look at 30% of it. It is the balance of detail to lack of detail within your picture. So if you've got, all this stuff going around the plane, all of those elements, all of those items are really there to get the audience to focus on the part that I want them to look at. Because I have not worked too light yet, I've still got a lot of room to be able to go in and add highlights to this plane later on after I detail it more. Again, I just used that right click trick. So I'm clicking V on my keyboard, right clicking and going to the plane for its base layer. From here, I can again hold down Control on the icon, select it and move up. Now I want to go in and just real quick, for the sake of finishing off this demo for this evening, I've got a super bright blue color. You can see how up and saturated we're starting to get here. That's still a little bit higher than I want to work. That's pretty bright as well. Let's go into the blues for this, and that is a good bright highlight within this plane. I'm working on a new layer. My opacity is down to 27%. I am not working at full opacity on this painting at all. So this first one, right, you can see how big of a difference that creates within my scene. Now here's the second one. This is me building into some of those highlights here. Going on the wing. And we know that that wing is going to be catching full light here, right? That is really just, you know, it's a solar panel. It's not a plane anymore at this point. It is just catching all the sunlight. Same thing for this one, but it's getting a little bit less. And I'm working on top of that gray that I built up earlier. So that's going to be the brightest point on this guy. And then we've got this wing back here. Maybe a little bit of the highlight starts to hit right here. Maybe some of it starts to pull around the edge on the tip of the nose. Smudge tool again. Cleaning up that line space that I created just a moment ago. And this is allowing me to be able to really refine and have a moment or a conversation with the shapes that I'm making. Last thing here is we do have the dodge tool, which can be pretty useful. So the dodge tool and the burn tool. The dodge tool is going to lighten things. I'm holding down my left click on this little lollipop looking icon. Maybe it's a hand that looks like it's pinching a little lima bean or something. But the dodge tool is going to line things. The burn tool is going to darken things, and it's going to bring it closer to black. Let me show you the dodge tool real quick. This is something that you're going to use when you are polishing off and getting ready to finish your illustration or your what I'm doing right here is I'm just pulling in almost to white, just little areas here on my painting, so that becomes the thing that people are looking at the most. Another thing that you can do is after you draw this stuff in, because we are working addedly and non-destructively, then you can go in, since I did the, the plane, it's the highlights on their own layer. Then you can start to subtractively go in and add smaller little details within your painting. So if you want to add like some nuts and bolts and stuff like that onto it, this is kind of a smart way to be able to do it without having to overly detail it at all. This is still my highlight area, so if I wanted to, I can start to soften all of this up so that the plane appears more round. Notice I'm not stroking this as much. It's just a little bit of a wiggle that I'm using here, and then we can describe shape towards things getting a little bit more flat towards the front of the plane. And now we're starting to get a form that we are rendering within here, and we're starting to get some colors that are starting to build up from this sketch. So you can see how we are moving from an initial rough sketch, bam, into, from that to a polished, clean line art final painting that's in color that we're making some good choices about. I think that's going to do it for me in this demo this evening, you guys. Thank you so much for listening in on this. I hope that these continue to prove useful for you. Please keep in mind that these are optional. You do not need to, don't need to come to these, but I will be uploading this to the announcements section for you guys to review at your own pace. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Welcome to Digital Illustration. You guys are going to make some great things. My cat's attacking me right now. What a perfect end to tonight. Oh my goodness. What did you just do? He logged me out.